Welcome to Defending Our Children, everybody. I am Craig Sawyer, and I've got my co-host, Forrest Seeley, with me. We are going to celebrate a guest that is one of my personal heroes, and I think after we get done with today's show, you're going to understand exactly why. He is Mr. Bob Hamer. He was a U.S. Marine, served in the FBI undercover, did all kinds of things for our country. And we're going to get into a little bit of that today. But without further ado, Mr. Bob Hamer, welcome to the show and thank you for coming on.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you again.
You as well.
You as well.
So some of the people will recognize that. I hope more of them will go and watch it. Recognize you from our documentary film, Contraland, in which you shared so powerful some of your operations inside the FBI and some of your observations on what that means to the American public. Again, I just want to thank you for your contribution, sincerely, what you've done. And I'll get into a little bit more of why your work is so special to me. But let me just let you introduce yourself a little bit further, and we'll get into some of your experiences and what that means for everybody else pertaining to the children.
Hey, thanks, Craig. And it's actually an honor to be with you and Forrest. I spent 4 years on active duty in the Marine Corps and then 26 years in the FBI. Many of those years in the FBI were spent undercover. So I always joke that I never had a midlife crisis. I just became somebody different. So I successfully portrayed a contract killer. I was an international arms dealer. I was a drug dealer, both as a high roller hanging around Beverly Hills and down the streets of South Central buying rock cocaine from gang members. But as I know we're going to get into, probably my most difficult assignment and probably maybe my proudest was infiltrated NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. So in addition to those other roles of being the white collar criminal or the contract killer or the international arms dealer, I was a pedophile.
Well, I can say this about that assignment. I have talked to other agents from other agencies in that era who, after learning what you've done, told me to make sure to communicate to you. They said, Craig, you tell Bob Hamer he's a hero of mine too, because my agency asked me to go undercover in pedophile networks and pretend to be one of them in order to get the convictions and the rest, and I could not do it. And I declined the assignment. And you tell Bob Hamer I understand what he went through to make that contribution and give him my thanks. And I said, I sure will. But I said, make no mistake, Bob asked for that cup to pass from him too. He didn't want to take it. And from my understanding, the Bureau said, no, you kind of need to do this. And Bob's like, well, okay, then. That if direct order, and I set about bringing a successful case. And you dug into it. Correct me if I got that wrong, Bob, but that's...
Well, no, I mean, obviously the Bureau is not going to send you undercover or don't want to do it, but it was an assignment that I took on. It was probably the most difficult assignment I had, not from a physical standpoint. Look, I've been shot at. I've shot people. I've had a contract put out on my life. My life has been threatened on more than one occasion. But psychologically and emotionally, this was my most difficult case because I had to sit there and listen to men talk about what they had done to little boys and what they wanted to do to little boys. And really, it was all I could do to just prevent myself from either reaching across the table and strangling them, or maybe going into a meeting with a grenade and pulling the pin and figuring I'd do more for society if I wiped everybody out, including myself. So yeah, that was tough. I wasn't worried so much physically about my safety as I was just trying to maintain this emotional and psychological aspects of the assignment to be successful. You and I have talked about this. I mean, if in an undercover capacity, if someone is hiring me to kill their spouse or to kill somebody, they don't really care whether I like the ballet or football. They don't really care if I were a Marine or if I were a pastor. They just want to know whether I have the capability of doing the job, if I can kill someone. As a drug dealer, nobody ever asked me my political affiliations when I was trying to purchase drugs from them. As an international arms dealer, we didn't talk about politics, we talked about guns. But what I found in NAMBLA, and I infiltrated NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, an organization that's been around for approximately 35 years. It's a group of men who are sexually attracted to little. And what I found was it was a whole different mindset. And I had to really think like them I had to essentially emotionally, psychologically become one of them in order to be successful. I'll give you a couple examples. One of the guys that we convicted was a dentist. He had been married, had 2 children. He taped a Sylvan Learning commercial. You and I probably would have watched that commercial 100 times. My son or my granddaughter could use some educational help. So maybe I'll take him over to Sylvan and see if we can help. No, this guy taped the commercial because he was in love with the little and played it over and over again. One of the movies they used to like to watch was Lord of the Flies. And the reason was it was a bunch of little boys running around in their underwear. So I had to think like them. I had to see the world through their eyes. And I was throughout the entire undercover operation, I was always afraid I was going to say something that didn't quite fit within this whole NAMBLA parameters, and I was going to give myself away. And I have to say that unlike most undercover cases, I mean, probably half my undercover cases, I had someone introduce. So, as we, the term you hear on TV, working off, we arrest A, and in order for him not to go to jail, he's got to give up B, C, and D. And so he takes me in as his cousin or his sidekick, or now I'm the one, I'm Mr. Big, and he's introducing me as Mr. Big that wants to buy the guns and the drugs. I had no one in NAMBLA, so I didn't have anyone back in my play. And if I made a misstatement, if I said the wrong thing, if I did the wrong thing, it could have blown the investigation. So even from that standpoint, it was tough. But when I went in, when I was meeting with these people, I had to turn on that brain so that I was thinking and acting and talking like
to me, that's what compels me the most about your work there, is that not only do most people not realize that there is a legal organization that's allowed to have lobbyists and push for what they want. As far as child rape, you had to go in and, like you said, you had to make them believe that you were like-minded, and that's a painful experience for a man who is repulsed by any sort of harm to children. And so really, I want people to understand the sacrifice that took, because you did a good job as an undercover agent building that case. I mean, you wrote for their magazine, for crying out loud. You did an outstanding job of getting in there and doing what you had to do, cause them to be true believers and gain the access that you needed to bring the factual evidence to get convictions. And you did get 8 convictions in the court of law in so doing. So God bless you for that contribution, Bob.
Yeah, it was an interesting phenomenon, really, because as you mentioned, I mean, it's an organization that actually is a First Amendment protected organization. Their mission statement, if you want to put it that way, is not to go find little boys and have sex. Their mission statement is to abolish age. And I'm sure most of your listeners are aware that throughout the world, we have age of consent. A child is not deemed to give permission to engage in sexual conduct until they reach. So it may vary from country to country. It may vary from, so if you, as an adult, if you have sex with a child below this age, you are committing statutory rape. It doesn't matter whether that child consents to that act or not. It's considered statutory rape.
Right.
What NAMBLA, their premise, I guess you'd say, their mission was to abolish age of consent laws. That's on paper, that's what they were designed. So they were an advocacy group that had a First Amendment right to advocate for this, just as if we wanted to start the National Bank Robbers Association and we wanted to advocate to legalize bank, it's probably never going to happen, but that allows us as bank robbers to get together and talk about, how we rob banks and where we go to rob banks and what's the best way to do it. But in reality, we're here to legalize.
Yes, sir. Got it.
You talked about how I had to think like them and be like them. And really, I guess you could say from an undercover capacity, it was a real feather in my cap when they asked me to be on their steering committee, which is their governing body. The FBI made it very clear prior to me attending the first national meeting that I attended. And let me back up and just say that when I joined, it was we were targeting overseas people that were traveling overseas to have sex with children. And we were targeting a travel agent, putting together these trips for boy lovers, BLs. In my research, I came across the organization called NAMBLA, joined the organization, and now became essentially a card-carrying member of NAMBLA. Now, I was asked to participate in their pen pal program and their Christmas card program, where we would communicate with members that were incarcerated. So I started communicating with. I learned that they were having a national. I contacted the leadership and said, "Hey, I'd like to go to your next national meeting. And essentially was told, no, you haven't been a member long enough. Vouch for another member before we will invite you to our essentially top secret meeting. So I just continued to do the correspondence. As you mentioned, the first segment, I wrote for their magazine. Eventually, I became what they perceived to be a true believer. And they invited me to their first meeting. The first meeting I was invited to was in New York City. And this was the eye opener for me, Craig and Forrest, is when I went back to New York City. As I mentioned, I've infiltrated some pretty tough organized crime groups, Italians, Asians, Russians. This was the most paranoid group that I had ever infiltrated. We were to meet at the eating concourse, the lower concourse at Grand Central Station. Once we got there, they would tell us where the meetings were going to be because they didn't want to announce ahead of time where these meetings, because they feared law enforcement was going to set up surveillance and either catch everyone going to the meeting or arrest them. So we get to the lower concourse. I walk down there. I introduce myself to the members. And I have to admit, I thought that I'm a trained agent. I've been around. I thought they all looked like long, greasy hair with horn-rimmed glasses and a trench coat. And when I'm walking down the ramp and I'm looking at this meeting and this group of gathering of men, some of them really were, hey, central casting, send me a pervert. But some of them look normal. I recognize that on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm about a 2.5 with makeup, but I don't think I looked like a pervert. Well, once I got into the group and began to look around, some of these people look normal. I fit in with the group.
I think that's a good lesson, is that a lot of us instinctively feel like we'd be able to spot a predator. And in reality, that's just not true. And that they can look like anyone. And appreciate that you bring that, because it allows people to be more empowered and aware threat, and that it's not just some creeper in a trench coat with or without horn-rimmed glasses, but that, you've got to be aware. And that brings me to a question I want to ask you is, how is it, Bob, that you see from your experiences that people can from this? Because, man, you've got so much experience and knowledge that I want to let you just riff on that a little bit.
Well, I will say that I think it is important to recognize that there is no check. We can't say because the man is 57 years old and overweight, lives in his mother's basement, that he happens to be the pedophile. What I found in NAMBLA, I dealt with Mensa members and I dealt with the illiterate. It ran the whole socioeconomic. So I had guys that were airline pilots. We had people that had PhDs. We had people that were barely literate. We had people that flew to the NAMBLA meetings in their own airplanes. And we also had people that were on welfare. So there wasn't any way of telling it. I ran into men like to have sex with adult women and sex with little boys. I ran into men that were married and had children, but still enjoyed having sex. I ran into men that claimed to be openly gay. I ran into men who claimed they weren't gay. They only like to have sex with little boys and little girls. They didn't view themselves as being gay or straight. They viewed themselves as being a boy lover, a girl lover, or a child.
Well, one of the things that I've learned talking to the adult victims, Bob, that I don't think a lot of those predators either know or care to know, depending on case by case, is that sex with a child, even if it's not vicious and physically harmful, it's psychologically traumatizing for the child. And I know that from talking to all the adults who were childhood victims, and they say, Craig, it shattered my little mind. It traumatized me. I did not know how to make it stop. I could not advocate for myself. I could not formulate a defense. I wasn't big enough and strong enough. Look, and I think part of it's the adult brain is not fully developed until at least 23 to 25 years. You look at any university study, and that's the clear science. So the higher intellect portion of the brain that a courtroom trial lawyer utilizes to formulate a defense or a prosecution deals with long-term ramifications of behaviors and so forth. And those portions of the brains are not even developed in a child. They don't have the ability to advocate for themselves. So when somebody may think that they are loving, quote unquote, loving on a child, what they're really doing is perverse and unnatural and psychologically traumatizing to the child. Bob, I think that's one thing. If we can bring that to the populace and change our educational system to demonstrate that factual reality, we can start to turn this around and prevent a lot of harm, because just because an adult male or female wants to perpetrate a sexual act on a child, just because you don't see blood and guts and bruises everywhere, doesn't mean that that child has not been very, very deeply traumatized and scarred for life, because by my observation, they are. And that's something we need to all pause and contemplate when this, boy lover, it may seem like love to the adult, but to the child, traumatizing because it's unnatural. And I think that's where the trauma comes from. It's in the child's defense and their makeup not to be wired for that. And I think that defense being overridden is where the trauma comes from. So your work, Bob, and I want to celebrate your book. Bob, you've written a book that is very powerful and very entertaining. It's very fascinating to follow your journey inside of NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, and the last Undercover. And I know it's not the only book you've written, but it's one that's very special to me. You want to just share with us a little bit about the book and how it came about? People may appreciate about it.
Yeah, I have to admit, I never took creative writing in college. I never aspired to be a writer. I laughed that enough defense counsel said that I was a great fiction writer, but they were always trying to tear down the affidavits that I'd written to get arrest warrants against their clients. But once we wrapped up the NAMBLA investigation, that was kind of that case that I had to talk about, that I had to alert the public to this boy lover agenda, to this, not just the organization of NAMBLA, not this specific organization, but this entire boy lover agenda, this agenda where pedophiles are seeking out our children, both boys and girls. And so I ran into an agent at a Christmas party and was introduced and told him about my experiences in NAMBLA, and he suggested that I write about it. And I was thinking about writing about it as well, because it was a catharsis for me to put this on paper. We got the book done, quickly got 24 rejection letters from publishers. The agent seemed to think this was going to go sell very quickly, and he was wrong. So then we had a couple publishers say, look, we don't want an entire book on NAMBLA. If you'll throw in a dozen other undercover cases, we would consider publishing it. I really wasn't out to pound my chest and say, look at me, how cool I am, because I was an undercover FBI agent. But I realized if I wanted to get this message out about NAMBLA, I was going to have to throw in other cases. So we included stories about the contract killings and some drug cases and all of that. And I think it did make the story about pedophiles a little more palatable. That's the book that came out of that, The Last Undercover.
Well, I appreciate you for writing it, sharing that to the populace. Folks, if you haven't read it, I urge you, buy 10 copies, read one, keep it, and give the others to your friends. They'll be empowered by it, and genuinely. And it's a fascinating story. There's a Silence of the Lambs type of experience you had in one chapter that just is riveting. I mean, what Bob experienced there was nothing short of fascinating. So I don't know if you want to talk about any of that, Bob, or what you'd like to most share today, but one of my favorite books.
Oh, well, thank you, Craig. I appreciate that.
You get that on book tape as well?
It's an ebook. Yeah,
It's an ebook.
You can get the paperback now. The hardback's out of print, but the paperback's available. And it is an ebook.
Okay.
If you want the audio version, Forrest, I'll read it to you, buddy.
It's easier for me to be on a run to listen to a book than it is for me to sit down and take the time, because I've always got stuff going on. But
Forrest, I hope one of your listeners is an audio publisher, because I would like to get this in an audio version, but none of the publishers have stepped up to make this an audio book, because I do an awful lot of listening to books on tape.
I will ask around. I will add that too, because I'm always asking somebody for something, and then I can say, "Oh, by the way."
Good. Yeah.
I have a question for you, if I can. And you don't have to name names, but in your undercover work, were there any officials? It could be a yes or no, or if you want to share, that would be great. But did you ever run any public officials or high-ranking officials in your investigation?
No, I never did. I kind of thought maybe I would. I will say this. I was shocked when I got into NAMBLA, I figured we were going to run into more public officials, and maybe they just had enough sense not to be that public by showing up at the meeting. What I did find was that in the 8 people that we convicted, and I think this kind of goes back to what Craig had talked about earlier, we had a PhD psychologist that worked at 2 Chicago area hospitals. He actually was a part-time flight attendant for American Airlines and bragged about using his free mileage to go to Thailand and Mexico to have sex with little boys. We had a dentist who used to advertise, you probably get the mailer, and would advertise that he likes children and children like him when you would get those weekly mailers from various merchants in the neighborhood. We had 3 special ed teachers. We had an ordained minister who was also a chiropractor. We had a physical fitness trainer, a bodybuilder and fitness trainer, and we had a blue collar worker. So that ran the gamut. I ran into lawyers, but no politicians.
Well, Bob, one of the things that you pointed out in Contraland, and I thought it was so powerful, it was your observation about fathers and the nature of the predators and how they choose their targets. Would you like to share a little bit of your expertise on that, sir?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize, and again, I'm not a psychologist, never even took the course in college, but I found that, and I believe this is true of both boys but they naturally seek a father figure, and they are going to look for the father figure. And if there's not a loving, strong, loving father figure in the home, children are going to look elsewhere. And what I found, particularly in NAMBLA, they targeted those families where there wasn't a strong, loving father figure in them. So it may be an absent father, it may be an alcoholic father, it may be an abusive father, but that child was seeking that. And that's who the NAMBLA members targeted. And we've all seen this incident where the coach gets arrested and you've got 10 other players on the team saying, oh no, he was a great guy, he never did anything to me, but he did do something to the child of the single mom or that child of abusive father. And so what I found, there were several instances where NAMBLA members even talked to me about this. And remember, guys, I was one of them. I wasn't this defense counsel. I wasn't this court-ordered psychiatrist. So they were talking to me as if I were one of them. And they would go after that child that was seeking the father figure. They would groom the child as much as they would groom that single mom.
Well, is it no wonder then a strong, masculine, capable father and a traditional nuclear family unit are under such attack these days. Culturally, it's along with the normalization of child rape. Alfred Kinsey really politicked very hard to normalize the entire notion of raping a child so that it could somehow be deemed normal and good. And boy, how convenient if there is no more strong, loving father and parents that are closely united and looking after their children. By your observation is what provides the safety for the little one. So it breaks my heart, but it's empowering. I think your observations and your experience is really important for people to note, so that's how we defend our children. It's reversing what they are attacking. The nuclear family unit, the strong, loving father in the home, is one thing that is very important in defending children. So, your experience, Bob, is priceless in bringing that message to the populace.
Oh, I think you're right. I mean, it's not politically correct to say. I mean, there is a movement within the psychological community to even remove pedophilia as a mental disease and disorder. Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, Mental Diseases and Disorder. People want to remove pedophilia as a mental disorder. You see the normalization of pedophilia. You see the idea that we want to refer to them as minor attracted people. Somehow this whole effort to destigmatize pedophilia, that's what it's all about. Well, you see the attempts to destroy the family, the attempts to lessen the value of a child, the sexualization of children. All of this plays within this whole panorama of ideas, making children available to adults as sexual objects.
Yeah, well, we've experienced a lot of censorship and suppression of the truth surrounding this topic. And just like you might have run into with the publishing of your book, they wanted you to maybe water it down with other things and not just have a hard-hitting book about the topic. Contraland, there was a lot of censorship and suppression of that, the reach of that documentary film and other documentary films on the topic. So the same culture that's trying to, or agenda rather, that's trying to attack the American culture of defending our children is something we need to be aware of so that we can counter it and just create a safer space for children. That's my motivation. And I know you guys see it the same way. What's wrong with defending children and allowing them to just happy and safe in their childhood so they can reach adulthood unharmed? Because Lord knows there's enough hostility and stress and trauma in our adulthood. Let's just get the kids to 18 at least so they can begin adulthood without this type of madness ensuing upon them. But I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your time. It's been a fantastic chat. I want to give you the opportunity to share any last thoughts that you may have, as well as how to find your book, how to find you, and what you would have people know about your efforts.
Well, the books are available at Amazon. If you go on Amazon, you'll see the books are available. But that's not why I'm here to promote the book. I want to say that I think in terms of acronym. When I talk to parents groups about protecting their children, I like to use the term ACT: affirm, communicate, and trust. Let me tell you, a child that's affirmed, a child that believes he is loved by his parents, by others, is not going to fall for the wiles of these pedophiles that are trying to persuade them to engage in illegal and immoral conduct. Communication. Families that have open communication, where the parents can talk to the children feel they can talk to their parents, they are less likely to fall for the actions of these pedophiles. One of the things that they try to do is, look, this is our secret. We have to keep this from from your parents. If anyone finds out about what we're doing, we're both going to get in trouble. So we need to keep this quiet. Well, now, if you have open communication with your children and they realize they can talk to you about anything, they're going to bring this up, that you don't have secrets. Your children don't keep secrets from you. So affirm and communicate, and then trust. Ronald Reagan said, when he was referring to the Soviets, trust but verify. Look, when somebody doesn't just seem right, where they're making inappropriate comments, or they're maybe looking at your child a little bit differently, or you're uncomfortable with it. Listen to your gut. Listen to that Holy Spirit within you. Listen to that feeling that something isn't right. And listen to your child. There may be a reason why he doesn't want to sit on Uncle Harry's lap. And it could be because Uncle Harry has bad breath. But it might also be because Uncle Harry did something inappropriate. The child doesn't know how to say that. He doesn't know how to articulate these actions, but he knows that it isn't right. So listen to your child. Affirm, communicate, and trust, because if you don't act, there are people out there that will act. So we need to prevent their actions.
Very good, Bob.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. And we've seen that predators love to work themselves into positions of unsupervised access to children. And that's a lot of what you've described here today. And I think if people realize that coaches, scout leaders, teachers, and so forth that have access to your children, we should trust them, but verify. I'm a big advocate of security camps to allow the little ones to be defended and looked after, and accountability. So folks, I hope you've enjoyed and educated, empowered by some of what Bob's shared here today. You can go catch his book, The Last Undercover, on Amazon. And we appreciate you guys tuning in, joining us with Defending Our Children.